who are signing in right now. I see we've got 22 on the line and quite a number more registered, so I'm hoping that that number will increase. As you said, Matt, we've got people from across the country who are tuning in, and for those of you who don't get a chance to listen today, we will be recording this this webinar so that it can go on the CCSN website and be listened to offline or watched offline. Matt, I just wanted to do a quick check with you that this is recording. Excellent. Okay, so as Matt said, we're going to talk today about the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance and provide an update and get some of the perspectives from the patient community and the people on the line on how the process can be optimized for patients, starting with how they can be engaged effectively on the process and the policies that support the PCPA, the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. I'll be joined today by Joanne Chambers, my colleague at 360 Public Affairs, as well as Louise Binder of the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network, and one of the top patient advocates for many years now. Louise, I'm not going to say how many, but the cancer community is so fortunate to have you picking up the baton on their challenges, given your background and experience and huge successes at all levels of government over many years in other therapeutic areas. I'd also like to say that we have done webinars in the past. Last year we reviewed the IBM report, which we'll make some reference to today. And the year before we gave an update, but so much has happened on the PCPA in the intervening time. This is very timely to be able to walk you through a few things and to encourage some dialogue on how patients can be involved and be engaged. So with that, we're going to discuss a handful of things, and I'll maybe turn it over to Joanne Chambers to walk us through today's webinar, and we'll get started. Joanne.
Great, thanks, Bill. So as Bill mentioned, it's been a few years since we've had a PCPA webinar. So we'll start by doing a bit of level setting exercise by providing a general overview of the initiative. We'll examine what has been the impact of the PCPA on patient access based on the information we have available to date, and then how the PCPA process has been evolving and what lies ahead for the initiative. And finally, we'll involve Louise Binder in an exchange and discussion, and we'll touch on how patients can get engaged as part of this PCPA process.
And just for listeners, please keep your questions and mark them in even as we're speaking. Start typing them in the questions boxes, because hopefully we'll be able to have a few by the time we get to the end. We're going to leave at least 15 minutes for Q's and A's. So, Joanne, take us away.
So first, just a reminder of the objectives that have been set out by governments for the PCPA. First objective is increase access to drug treatment options. The second is to improve consistencies of funding across the country, because of course by having the 14 jurisdictions come together under one initiative, it'll improve consistency of decision making. One of the key objectives of governments is to lower drug costs through the PCPA to address some of their budgetary constraints that they've been struggling with. And finally, reduce duplication, again, by having all of the jurisdictions come under one process, and by having only one negotiations, there can be an improved use of the resources. So PCPA participants, the initiative now includes all 14 Canadian jurisdictions. We saw that Quebec joined in October of last year, and that the federal plans joined in February of this year. So we have 2 added new jurisdictions, and this should again improve consistency in funding decisions across the country. It might also, perhaps in some cases though, delay some of the decisions on whether to engage in negotiations or the actual negotiation themselves, because you've got two more jurisdictions that are coming to the table with their own sets of interests, especially if you consider the case of Quebec. Quebec, as some of you know, has its own health technology assessment process, NS, which issues its recommendations sometime at different times as the Canadian agencies for drugs and technology and health, and sometimes the substance of the recommendation is also different from that. That said, though, we know that there has been ongoing work with NS trying to collaborate with processes, and that NS has been taking some measures to try to address especially the timing challenge in terms of when the recommendations are issued. So there are two streams as part of the PCPA. We'll focus more of our presentation on the innovative medicine side of things. But just briefly want to mention that there's the innovative medicine stream, but also the generic medicines initiative. So in terms of the innovative medicines, this is basically an initiative to help facilitate the joint negotiations of drugs that are being considered for reimbursement by the public drug plans. So in practice, what happens is that the manufacturer negotiates with the PCPA some key terms for reimbursing the medication, and that typically includes negotiating a confidential drug. It's after that the terms of that agreement will be implemented at the jurisdictional level by each of the public drug plans through individual product listing agreements. So the co-lead for that initiative, for the Joint Negotiation Initiative, is currently Ontario and Nova Scotia. And we've included here a list of statistics in terms of how the PCPA has been doing in their negotiations. So as of July, you can see that there has been 112 completed or closed negotiations. There are 32 active negotiations underway. There are 38 products where no negotiation has occurred, and 13 to individual consideration by each of the public drug plans. And what's interesting here to note is the actual number of negotiations that are underway. We're at 32, and that's quite high when you compare to preceding years. We've observed a real increase in the number of active negotiations underway at the PCPA. If you compare with 2014, for example, the PCPA was engaged in about 12 active negotiations on average. In 2015, that increased to 20 on average. And recently, starting just in June of this year, we've seen that that has gone over the 30 threshold. So the workload of the PCPA is substantially increasing. On the generic side of things, there is the value price initiative. And under this initiative, the national price for 18 generic medicines is limited to 18% of the reference innovative price.
And there's a generic tiered pricing mechanism for all other, sorry, keep on going, Joe.
That's right. So for other generic medicines that are not covered by this initiative, they go through the tiered pricing framework, and that's basically a framework that has been negotiated between the PCPA and the generic industry. And what it does is that, again, it establishes a price for these new generics that are entering the market as a percentage of the brand name drugs. And that percentage reduces over time as additional manufacturers enter the market. But that framework is set to expire in March 2017 and is being reviewed. So just a few words on savings that have been achieved by the PCPA. As mentioned earlier, one of the key objectives of the PCPA is to reduce drug costs. And so they've reported in July that the innovative and generic initiatives combined have resulted in savings to governments of approximately $712 million annually. And that's as of April of this year. We've set on this slide just a high-level overview of how the PCPA process works. Typically, a new innovative process, a new innovative medicine will, once it received its market authorization from Health Canada, go to the Canadian Agencies for Drugs and Technology and Health, where it will be assessed for comparative clinical and cost effectiveness. And it's after that step that it then goes to the PCPA. It gets reviewed by the PCPA. So the first step of the process under the PCPA involves a jurisdiction coming together and deciding whether or not they will undertake joint pan-Canadian negotiations for a product. And that PCPA can decide to either not negotiate at all the product, which generally means that there won't be listings by public drug plans. It can decide to negotiate the product jointly under the PCPA, or to refer the product to individual consideration by each of the public drug plan. And in that category, individual drug plans will decide whether they want to have negotiate directly with the manufacturer a product listing agreement and reimburse it. So if the negotiations have been successful, it'll result in a letter of intent, which will set out the terms of the agreement. And the letter of intent will be signed by the manufacturer and the lead jurisdiction. And we should mention that the negotiations, when the negotiation starts, a lead jurisdiction is identified to carry out the negotiations on behalf of all the participating drug plans. So if an agreement is reached, then that will be captured in the letter of intent. It'll be signed by the manufacturer and the lead jurisdiction. And then that letter of intent will be shared with all of the participating jurisdiction. What's important to note is that the letter of intent is not a legally binding document. So that means that it's really up to each participating jurisdiction right now to make their final decision on funding the product through their own drug plan and enter into individual product listing agreements with the manufacturer. So in this sense, the LOI currently is really only an option to list. So we've talked about how the PCPA has been reviewing new medications coming out of CADITH, but I just want to say a quick word on the fact that the scope of the PCPA has been expanding. It's now also negotiating certain products that have already been reimbursed by public drug plans. So it has been involved in renegotiating certain existing product listing agreements, and also it has been involved in therapeutic drug class negotiations. Also, as you'll note, like as part of this process, there's no reference to the PCPA office, but now that it has been established, it does play a role as part of the PCPA process, and we'll discuss this a bit later in the webinar, what role it does have in the process.
So thanks, Joe. Just to make a note, and every time that patients have an opportunity to engage with the office of the PCPA or individual jurisdictions, there are a set of guiding principles that actually stem originally from the cancer community. The Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review, PCODR, which many of you are familiar with, is actually founded on and based on a core set of principles. And these were actually taken up by the external consultants that reviewed the PCPA and made recommendations on how to improve it in 2014. And the office of the PCPA has, and the jurisdictions have actually presented on these core principles. First, they want to make sure that the process is holistic, that it considers value from multiple perspectives, that it's predictable, so that there's a communication of process, timelines, decision-making, etc., that there's a consistent approach in process, while recognizing that each negotiation has some unique characteristics, that it's transparent, and this really means timely and regular public reporting, that it's efficient and effective, that it reduces the duplication that was previously in place when each of the jurisdictions negotiated on their own, and that they align with the current national health technology assessment reviews. PCPA principle as well is that it's collaborative and representative, that it's cross-jurisdictional, and that it has engagement with stakeholders. that it be respectful, that it recognizes the different perspectives and the needs of different stakeholders, that it's ethical, that it reflects ethical principles such as validity, veracity, or truthfulness and autonomy. The last principle that they laid out is actually that it be value driven and that it achieves value for the healthcare system. Interestingly, the IBM report actually had this principle originally as timeliness, the last principle as the requirement that the process be timely. This was dropped from that list and replaced instead by the focus on being value driven. So just a couple of points on the Office of the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. It was formally established in September 2015. It's housed in the Ontario Public Drug Programs, but it is separate and it operates separately from the OPDP or the Ontario Public Drug Programs. The lead within the office is Imran Ali, who is the public face of the PCPA. And really, Imran has done a great job of being accessible to and liaising with stakeholder groups and actually working on several, or many, I should say, engagement opportunities and meetings by leveraging his well-rounded team. He's got 5 people in total, including himself. We've got a senior negotiator, a senior pharmacist, an economist, as well as a negotiations consultant in the office. Really, the office is focused right now on developing negotiation guidelines to formalize and standardize the negotiation process, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the webinar. Currently, the office, in addition to coming up with these negotiation guidelines, it's active in supporting the public drug plans on the negotiations. Really importantly, though, it does not lead the negotiations. The negotiations themselves are actually led by one or co-led provinces, territories, or the federal drug programs. Once the negotiations start, that's when they liaise with the manufacturer. Until the negotiations start, stakeholders are expected to work directly with the Office of the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. In terms of negotiation support, what they're doing in advance of when negotiation starts, they're doing a lot of upfront research on the products, and they're working with the manufacturer so they can help the jurisdictions make a decision on whether to move forward with negotiations. While the step might prove to be better in terms of better informing the jurisdictions to prepare them for negotiations, and it could lead to downstream efficiencies in the process. Currently, we've done some crunching of the numbers and it appears to be slowing down the start of the negotiations. What used to take around 55 days is now taking 75, 80, 85 days. The other task that the PCPA office is undertaking is administrative support, tracking of performance metrics, so collecting data on how the negotiations are going, and capacity building. They're really trying to help the jurisdictions adhere to some of those principles that we talked about earlier. So we've done additional research on the impact of not just the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, but if we think about it, the PCPA really is in place to help negotiate the terms of product listing agreements. And these are, as Joanne mentioned, agreements that are implemented by each jurisdiction or drug plan with the manufacturer, determining an effective price, a lower price than what is on the public list price. And we wanted to look at what the world was like before product listing agreements were available. So we took a 2-year period before the end of 2006. So in 2006, that's when Ontario actually was the pioneer in product listing agreements and confidential price agreements in particular. So we took the 2 years pre-2006 and the 2 years from the end of 2015 back. So that was when PCPA was very active. And we looked across the drug plans, and we noticed a few things when we looked at that data. First, if you look back in 2006, only a couple of provinces were listed anywhere near 30% on their public drug programs. And there was a low number that were being listed at all. If you can see the numbers there, ranging from 6 in total in PEI during those 2 years, up to 32 in Quebec. So just look again on the left graph, and fast forward to 2015, you'll see that the total number of products that could be potentially listed has doubled. And the total number that we're actually reimbursed in most cases has more than doubled, and especially in provinces like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador, the total number of products that they had listed in those previous 2 years just shot right up. Secondly, if you look on the graph on the right, the percentage of the new medicines reimbursed went from a very low percentage in some cases, 6%, 11% in some of the Atlantic provinces, right up to over 30% in most jurisdictions across the country. So two things. One, a higher percentage of total products that are listed, still far from 100% of what Health Canada approves. But you'll also see, in addition to more, that there's much more consistency. Most of them are actually in the range of 30% across the provinces. Other observations, this is obviously reflecting an increase in the capacity to list and the timeliness of decisions in smaller provinces, especially Atlantic Canada, that might not have been in a position to negotiate on their own or afford some of the products that are coming through. They have obviously been able to find that budget and move forward on a lot more listings than they could 10 years ago. Also, we've seen a lot more consistency with Common Drug Review recommendations and the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review recommendations. One thing that we can't see from the data is really how consistent these negotiated agreements are with the signed letters of agreements that came through the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. That's something that we want to keep an eye on. As Joanne mentioned earlier, the provinces and territories and the federal government are claiming over $700 million in savings from both the generic and the innovative streams, and those are significant numbers. At the same time, they've managed to keep total health expenditures on prescription medicines almost flatline or stable between 2009 and 2015. Basically, if you look at what we said before, the number of new drugs has gone through the roof, but their spending is actually flatlined. There's very strong evidence to show that they're getting favorable deals, and the de facto prices that the plans are actually paying are significantly less, either on average or in aggregate, compared to what they were paying before 2006. Now that said, I shouldn't say that said, since PCPA really got announced in 2010, the first product went through the system in 2011, and since then, as Joanne mentioned, 112 closed or completed negotiations. The process is still evolving. The ongoing negotiation guidelines, the office has been actually out and actively consulting with pharmaceutical industry and patient groups to inform those guidelines. That general info has been shared with stakeholders, and that means a flow chart or a process for how things work through the system, as well as a very high-level outline of guidelines. We're looking forward to seeing more input on and reaction to those from both stakeholders and the office of the PCPA, and I think that webinars like this will hopefully help continue that discussion. Timelines and timeliness. There are currently no timelines for each step of the negotiation process, but we're hoping that these timelines will be included in those guidelines that are being developed. And as mentioned previously, there appears to be a backlog in the negotiations that started in the fall of 2015, and really that's just the greater delays in terms of a decision to begin negotiations. It could be due to the increased workload at the PCPA. In other words, they're negotiating more products. How much more can they take on given the current resources that they have across the provinces and the federal government? There are more products. And as mentioned before, the PCP office is now engaged in more research on the product, which might be delaying the start of the negotiations. In the recent consultations with patient groups, there are some general target timeframes that appear on a slide that suggest that they're ranging from 3 months to 6 months, but really, so 3 months minimum, that's the amount of time that they will take to decide whether or not to start negotiations. And at 6 months, that's when a red flag goes up to the plans that say, hey, we should probably make a decision here. But we've seen some negotiation starts actually take a bit longer than that. Another issue that they're working through is sorting or prioritizing. Jurisdictions have indicated they are looking at a new system to help the PCPA and public drug plans decide which products will offer the highest potential added value for the plans. And there's no formal system in place for sorting and prioritizing. However, and this is of note for the cancer community, the cancer products that have gone through the system appear to take a bit less time to start their negotiations. So they appear to be a priority. And we're talking the difference between 65 days on average for cancer products versus 79 days for all products. Patient engagement. The PCPA has held a few stakeholder sessions with patients over the past couple of years to provide them regular updates on the evolution. And really they are very open to engaging and looking forward to hopefully even webinars like this and some of your good questions that you're already coming up with, so thank you. We have a question on biosimilars, and maybe I'll save that for the discussion, but there is on the PCPA website a first principles document that's meant to help guide the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance approach to negotiating biosimilars and the reference biologics. They're intended to just be a starting point. They are subject to revision as they are implemented. So they just wanted to put something out there to say this is our starting thinking for how we're going to potentially prioritize subsequent actually biologics or biosimilars, and some expectations that they have for both the biosimilar and the originator reference products and other products in a therapeutic category. They're engaging in class reviews and actually negotiating across classes now. And so they've expanded the scope. What PCPA used to focus on until last year really was new products that were coming through the health technology assessment system. So they would first go to Health Canada, yes, green light, approved and on the market, go through health technology assessment where CADIT or INES would say, you know, the cost effectiveness looks okay here, or the clinical effectiveness looks okay here. And then to PCPA for individual drugs. Now what they're looking at is putting 3 or 4 drugs head-to-head in a negotiation and working across all manufacturers to say you know, what kind of value they can get out of them at the same time. Performance measures and evaluation. As we said before, the IBM report issued in 2014, in addition to principles and establishing the office, it recommended developing performance measures, working with patients and the pharmaceutical industry, and right now is a time to input on some of those opportunities in the guidelines development process. Joanne mentioned that they're looking at updated approaches to generic drugs, as that whole system is being renegotiated now. And I think very important for this entire system, the jurisdictions have really evolved PCPA in a relatively organic way, an ad hoc way, really learning as they've implemented it. And they want to formalize some of the things that they've accomplished to date, and look forward and have set up some expectations among themselves. And so they're going to be signing and actually working on a memorandum of understanding. And one of the key issues that I think external stakeholders would like to see, and I know it's probably an internal MOU among the jurisdictions, but there's really no set obligation to list a product once a negotiation is completed. what are the fair expectations for those to be reimbursed after negotiation is completed? Louise, you'll have to say about that. So we're actually, and gosh, we've got some great questions coming in, and we're not even half an hour, which is great. We'll have time to hopefully work through a lot of them. Themes for discussion, and this is going to actually throw the ball to Louise on a few of these issues. First, Louise, if your mic is on, I hope it is. What in your opinion is the increased role of patients at the PCPA? And here are a few potential areas, but open question. What do you think? What can patients do more?
Thanks, Bill. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, which means everyone else can too.
Excellent. Thanks for the warning. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. And thanks, Bill, for your kind comments. I'm not sure I can live up to them, but I certainly appreciate them. I think the first thing that it's important to say is that conceptually, I think if you ask patients, do they think it's a good idea for provinces and territories, and indeed now the federal government, to use its combined power to negotiate the best possible price for drugs for Canadians in the public system? I think the answer would almost always be yes. So I think there's sort of a general support for this concept. And the hope is that by saying yes and by accepting, as I think we have to, that probably means some delay in the timing to access because of the negotiations, that the trade-off for that will be significant savings that will mean that, in fact, more drugs will be able to be covered in the system. And as you've mentioned, Bill, there does appear to be an increase in the number of drugs that are being reimbursed in the public system in recent years. It's certainly not where we want it to be yet. And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done on that. And of course, we also support the concept of an office for the PCPA. We advocated for that for a long time in order to ensure that as much administrative burden can be taken off people as well. So the question is, given sort of our general support for what's going on, where are the specific areas that patients both would like to see their role increased, and indeed, in general, where would they like to see things enhanced? Because access is obviously number one for patients, as one would expect. So I think the first thing that patients are wondering is why it's taking so long for PCPA to decide whether or not to negotiate. And I guess we know what's happening in the parts of the system before something is actually formally brought before PCPA. We've got Health Canada, we've got CADA. There's loads and loads of time, and it seems to us that this is an area that is very puzzling, because PCPA can make a decision, in our view at least, long before there's a formal necessity to actually begin negotiations. Why can't they do that in some much earlier time frame, so that their decision making around negotiations is being done concurrently with preceding processes, including CDR or P-coder, depending on the type of drugs at CADA. And that would really shave a lot of time off. Patients, I think, would very much like the opportunity in general to be able to speak to PCPA during the period that it's making its decision about negotiations or not, in order to give them the patient lens perspective about the importance of a particular set of negotiations for them, and to make sure that they have a clear understanding about the importance of a particular drug or biologic or set of drugs, whatever is being negotiated at that time. So I guess that's the first place that patients would like to see some streamlining and some involvement in that streamlining. I think the next thing that patients would like to see is a set of transparent metrics, both about the length of time that negotiations will take overall, and also about the length of time that each step in the negotiations will take. Understanding, of course, that there can always be some unexpected events that take place in that one can't, by unexpected I mean things that one cannot anticipate, that might stop the clock on any metrics that are set. But other than those unusual circumstances, why don't we see metrics? And then, of course, metrics, Health Canada does that, and Health Canada also takes some responsibility where it is responsible for its metrics not being met. So I think that we would want to see some kind of penalty or responsibility being taken by PCPA if they don't meet the metrics that they themselves have set without a reasonable explanation for that. So I think that's something else that we feel very strongly about. You've mentioned this question of automatic listing once negotiations are done, and I think we would definitely continue to support the necessity for automatic listing at the end of the negotiations. The reality is, I think, that when companies come to the table to negotiate, their negotiating strategy is based in part on understanding how many people might indeed be consumers of whatever is being negotiated. And so to put them in a situation where they really don't know, in fact, the number of potential consumers, because they don't know if everybody at the table is actually going to commit to listing, is really not fair to them, and more importantly, in my view, not fair to the patients who have traded off the waiting time of the negotiations in order that there be the possibility of some consistency of access across the country. If, in fact, it's a very small province where they really will not have the budget immediately, at the very least, I think there should be a commitment to when the listing will take place in those smaller provinces. So I think that's something else that patients would strongly support. I think the other thing that patients find disappointing about the process is that although we don't, I think generally as patient groups, want to know the puts and takes of negotiations, who offered what amount of money and who said what about that offer and all of that sort of thing. I think we're realistic that things are said and done in negotiations as part of the strategy, and the important thing is really the outcome. But I think that one of the things that we hear that's very disappointing to us is that there aren't very innovative approaches being taken to the kinds of contracts that are being entered into. So in other words, for sure, we understand that at the bottom line, if the amount of money that is being offered up is something beyond the realm of reasonableness for the payer, then nothing else is going to help. But still, there are ways of bundling that kind of those offers, so that they find different ways than just you pay this and we're willing to pay this and you're willing to offer that. So why don't we have more innovative contracts with pay for performance, with even bundling of products, with annual revisiting of the deals that have been made, or at least some kind of automatic revisiting based on commitments that are made about how many products will be effective for people, and whether in fact they meet those safety and effectiveness goals, and all of those kinds of things. And I know the PCPA says that it's open to innovative contracts, and that's wonderful, and I think they have tried a few things, but I don't think we're anywhere near the kind of innovation in contract negotiations and content that would really move things along much more quickly. So I think those are some of the kind of high-level things that worry patients. We're worried that there aren't enough resources being allocated to PCPA to do the kind of work that not only they've had to do so far, but we're very concerned, certainly in the cancer community, about the wave of wonderful new technologies, both companion diagnostics and treatments themselves, that we know are coming in the next few years. How are they going to deal with this? I think one of the things we would very much like would be the opportunity for a consultation on what they mean by value-driven. How can we come up with some kind of a formula for what is they talk about that being one of their guiding principles. Is that the same as the health technology assessment value? Is it something different? If it's something different, what is the formula for value within the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance process? And can we build something in terms of a formula that will triage drugs that are going through the system, so that those that are the most badly needed by some formula kind of come to the top, and we're assured that the patients that are most in need of the of medically necessary treatments for serious diseases will be treated fairly and quickly, rather than first come, first serve. Because first come, first serve in negotiations doesn't always mean that the most patients and the patients most seriously at risk are being dealt with first. So those are some of kind of my initial thoughts about what's going on with PCPA at the moment.
Thanks very much, Louise. And that was excellent. And you covered a lot of the waterfront for what patients would like to see. One of the questions I had about an increased role for stakeholders is the way that the PCPA is governed. Right now, there's a steering committee, and the actual alliance is actually comprised of the public drug programs across the country, and it reports up politically to the Premier's Council, or the Council of the Federation, and through the health ministers across the country. Not yet, because the federal government's not part of the Federation, but as the federal government has now joined, and the discussions around pharmaceuticals in the context of a new health accord potentially, I mean, do you see how and where a patient voice could actually get on some kind of governing council or board of directors for the PCPA, and what that would actually look like, and otherwise, as they get more formalized?
I don't think there's any question that patients perceive that there should be no part of the health policy system that directly impacts their lives where they should not have a meaningful role in the governance and leadership of that group. And of course, with part of the reason for that, amongst others, is the assurance that there will be transparency where we think there should be, that there will be accountability and open accountability, and that there will be ongoing evaluation and reporting back appropriately to all the stakeholders, including patients and patient groups, for the work that's being done.
Yeah, thanks very much. Maybe I'll throw you one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the couple questions that we have registered as part of the webinar. You know, how is cancer treatment access different? You mentioned there's the Common Drug Review process and there's the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review process, and they both evolved in different ways. They're both part of CADTH now. We see statistically that cancer products appear to be managed a bit differently, at least in terms of timelines. That might be you know, reflective of the high burden of illness and need for these products, but it also might be different people around the table in terms of those discussions. Do you see that there is a difference between how Canada approaches oncology treatments versus other products?
Well, I think that it's clear that there has been a decision by government that cancer requires discrete expertise. And I think the fact that we have cancer care agencies in every province, and that we also have a national cancer strategy is indicative of that. I mean, I think there's no question that that decision has been taken. Having said that, I think that there is a growing concern amongst patient organizations that are monitoring trends in cancer access and reimbursement, that in fact, although we have these processes that are supposed to provide us with greater expertise, the reality of the matter is that the budget implications of cancer are profound, and that somehow those agencies in general are not entirely keeping up with what's happening with the research, what's happening in immuno-oncology, what's happening with personalized medicine in oncology, and what's happening with the role of companion diagnostics there. So there is an opportunity for that expertise to actually grapple with these questions in a meaningful way, but I think there is a growing concern that they aren't. And I mean, one of the obvious problems that we in Ontario, for instance, see is that our own government in this province has not recognized that oral oncology drugs that are provided take home there's no policy for first dollar coverage for those, in the way that most other provinces other than the Atlantic have grappled with that problem and recognized the importance of doing that. So even across our country in oncology, we don't have a consistency of policy approach.
I think that's a good point. Some of the statistics I showed earlier, might not capture a lot of the products that are used in hospital in oncology. They're community pharmacy drugs, and they're really in aggregate. They've been broken down across therapeutic area, and I understand that the CanCertainty campaign is working on improving consistency of access to oral cancer drugs, or approach to them that would be similar or similarly supportive of funding for those as they do for drugs that are administered in institutions or clinics and in terms of IV. So those are great points. Just looking at a couple of the questions that we have over here, we have one listener who's asking about access to a specific product, and I won't get into the name on the live webinar, but in terms of accessing a specific treatment in the cancer world, I mean, your first step would be, of course, your treatment team and your oncologist. And second, in terms of advocacy, we've been talking a lot about the policy and the process that governs these negotiated agreements. The easiest way for an individual patient or caregiver to engage on that is actually to find out what their disease or site group association is really working on. So, you know, if it's a lung cancer that we're talking about, then we're looking at Lung Cancer Canada, or skin cancer. There are a few potential opportunities there, and these are myeloma. You'll have individual chapters in your communities, but also there's Myeloma Canada, and the list really goes on. And then, of course, there's the umbrella groups like the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network that really has done some great work across all tumor types in helping Canadians survive and make cancer history, which is what we're all trying to do. So those are, you know, my first thoughts, and probably all I can support on in terms of a live webinar. If you become an advocate anywhere near as successful as Louise on the line here, then you're going to have access by tomorrow, because there are a few people more determined or capable of making their demands heard and evidenced and making sure the right people hear about the situation than Louise. So I don't know, Louise, do you have any thoughts on that question in terms of individual challenges?
Well, I think that, you know, one of there's two that come to me sort of immediately. One is that asking an individual patient who is in the throes of trying to grasp with their diagnosis, let alone advocate in this very complex web that we have of access opportunities is just unrealistic. So it's really important that patients not, in my view, feel that they have to take that on themselves, and definitely approach organizations that you think can be helpful, and please find some people within, you know, your own circle who are willing to assist you. Don't try to take this on alone. This is much too difficult at a time that's already, you know, fraught with problems for you to expect you to work through that yourself. On a collective basis, I don't want people to be disrespectful. I hope I'm not disrespectful in the way that I challenge our system, but I still do think there is nothing disrespectful about challenging processes and systems that don't work for you. I keep trying to remind people that rules, guidelines, structures that are put in place to achieve a certain end, to do something. If those systems are not doing the thing that they say that they're supposed to be doing, for instance, if PCPA's processes aren't matching up with its guideline principles, I think there's nothing wrong with saying to a system, you need to change your guidelines and principles because they aren't achieving the goals that you say you want to. And I don't think we always do that. And I think we're entitled to do that as taxpayers, as patients, as patient organizations, as caregivers, as part of this society. So I guess, you know, I would kind of challenge us not to be respectful of people, but I don't think you have to be respectful of processes that aren't actually achieving the goals they say they're going to. I think you have a right to challenge those.
Thanks very much, Louise. And you know, that's based on a lot of experience in you know, different, again, a different therapeutic area. But maybe we'll turn to one question. Then I'm going to turn it back to you, Louise. We have one from a listener asking about where biosimilars fit into the two streams. We talked about the innovative stream and then the generic stream or multi-source. And currently, they actually fit into the innovative stream in that there's no set percentage price that is you know, publicly paid for a new biosimilar. And a biosimilar, just for the listeners' edification again, is a biologic drug, so it's made from a living organism, so it's much more complicated to understand, or even it actually can't reproduce it perfectly compared to the innovators. So after the normal intellectual property provisions lapse on the innovative biologic, there are new systems now to say, you know, this different biologic product is sufficiently similar to the original that it should be let on the market for the same indications as the original. And right now, health technology assessment agencies and the PCPA are working hard to figure out the right pathways for these similar biologics. Right now, again, they're going into the innovative stream, and I hope that helps answer your question as well. Go and look at the principles document. So, Louise, we're running up on about 4 minutes left. I don't see any other questions except for our friend Dennis thanking us for our input on this. Is there anything that the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network is doing to engage on the PCPA as well as other issues? Just thinking SurvivorNet is such a great resource for everybody. You know, how is the CCSN playing a role on this issue and others that are definitely busy these days?
Well, thank you. I mean, obviously, we involve in all consultations, and I'd really like to flag a couple. The Patented Medicine Prices Review Board is presently doing a broad consultation about its guidelines and role in determining whether prices are excessive in Canada. That's the language in the legislation. Please get involved with that. We are certainly preparing a consultation response, and we would welcome others to take a look at the response we're proposing. October 24th is the final date for those responses, and we would be glad to have others sign on with us if what we're writing makes sense to them. That's one thing. Second thing is we are specifically holding on November 15th and 16th a 2-day summit for patient groups as well as observers with regard to the whole issue of drug pricing in Canada. And we want to really both educate and mobilize patients to action in this area, because we think that there is a lot that we should be doing. So we will be sending out invitations, and you will find them on the CCSN website as well, the dates and an invitation. But please, if you can possibly join us for some or all of those 2 days, I think that would be very useful, and I'm really hopeful that coming out of that will be a core group that will want to continue to work on the issue of the implications of PCPA and drug pricing and the other systems that impact access for patients. So those are two of the kind of immediate things that are going on. I think the other thing, just in the last moment, is don't forget the private insurance system as regards pricing and reimbursement, because they also are in a process of realigning what they want to offer to their employers and therefore obviously to employees in terms of what they're willing to pay for and not pay for because of the cost of medications, and there's and that really needs to be looked at very carefully as well. So we will be covering that as part of our 2 days, so you can educate yourself about that, as well as a webinar that we did previously on this that you can access. So don't forget that we actually do have a private insurance system as well, that we need to be watching in terms of how it's making its process decisions about access.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Louise. If anyone has any specific feedback, we would welcome it offline. I'm just going to actually show our email addresses here. And just two last notes. One, Joanne, thank you for setting us up with some of the key updates for PCPA earlier. Louise, thank you so much for taking the time today to represent CCSN and provide the patient perspective. You know, we have to mention that the SurvivorNet's own Matt Handy is going to be getting married soon, and to which, yeah, there you go. Your mic is not muted, but it's a good handoff back to you, Matt. Congratulations, thrilled for you, and I hope we get you back to Ottawa soon so that we can do more of these things live with you.
With that, the shout out, Bill.
Yeah, there's the handoff back to you, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bill, and thanks again. Just I'll reiterate for Louise and Joanne and everybody for joining us today, and of course all of you on the line still. Thank you for being here. Now, make sure you stay tuned to our website. And make sure you sign up for our e-letters so you don't miss any future webinar opportunities. We'll have lots going on this fall, so make sure you stay up to date with everything that's going on through those two channels. And for anyone who missed it earlier, we will be uploading the full VOD, video on demand, of this to YouTube, and the slides will be on our SlideShare account. And as long as you have been registered for this webinar, you will get a link to both of those things in your email tomorrow afternoon. Otherwise, they'll also be on the front page of our website too, survivornet.ca, so you can always go there to find anything from this or past webinars. One more thing, we'll just thank once again three sponsors for this webinar series: Novartis, Boehringer Ingelheim, and Merck. Thank them for their support. And with that, we hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and we will talk to you next time.